Okay, folks, it's your buddy Mike Messier. Haven't done this in a while. This is an old school wrestling discussion. I want to talk about three lies of old school pro wrestling. Now, these three lies also involve tag teams and tag team championships, and really to the point, championships that people think certain tag teams held, but they didn't hold. And you might be saying, well, gee whiz, Mike, how can that be? How can people think someone had a championship if they didn't have it? Well, I'm going to explain, as I always do. First, Ole and Arn Anderson were never the National Wrestling Alliance World Tag Team Champions, or for that matter, the World Championship Wrestling Tag Team Champions. World Tag Team Champions. They were tag team champions, but the title they held was simply the National Tag Team title. And you might be saying, well, what are you talking about, Mike? Well, if you go back to 1985, late 84, early 85, it was a time of transition. You have to go back to Black Sunday, 1984, when Junior McMahon bought the rights to air wrestling at 6:05 on the Superstation TBS. The company that McMahon was really, putting out of TBS was Georgia Championship Wrestling, which was now known at that point as World Championship Wrestling, and Ole Anderson was one of the owners and one of the bookers, along with the Briscoes and Jack and Jerry. I believe what happened was Vince made some type of deal with Jack and Jerry. There was a power play. And basically the stars of what we knew as World Championship Wrestling and before that Georgia Championship Wrestling were all out, okay? And you had Vince there, and if you find this stuff on YouTube, it's actually pretty fascinating. I'm glad that the WWE hasn't done a documentary about the Black Sunday stuff because they would just totally Vinceify it. But if you look at the actual footage of, that guy Freddie Miller, who was the voice, be there, that guy, and Vince. It's all very alternate universe type of stuff. But in that mix, Ole Anderson and Thunderbolt Patterson, this old-time guy, Thunderbolt Patterson, was actually kind of a revolutionary for not only black wrestlers, but also all wrestlers. Thunderbolt Patterson was one of these, radical guys that was always fighting, for his own rights, but for the rights of other wrestlers to some extent, I suppose. I don't know the whole thing, but that's what I've heard. But anyway, Ole and Thunderbolt were the National Tag Team Champions as baby faces. And they brought in to the territory, I believe they beat the Long Riders, the Irwins. And these teams, the Irwins, Ronnie Garvin and Ted Oates, they had, I think it was the actual earliest Hollywood Blondes, if I'm not mistaken, Rip Rogers and Ted Oates. I think they were called were they the Blondes or were they something else? But you had like all these tag teams, but none of them could match up with the Road Warriors because the Road Warriors had left in early '84 and gone over to the AWA. And the Road Warriors for a couple of years were like the big thing in Georgia Championship Wrestling. Or World Championship Wrestling, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes the names were, back and forth, interchangeable. But Ole and Thunderbolt, not really a great, act, I guess, or a great team, just because they really just felt like a couple of old bowling partners. But then they bring in this kid, Arn Anderson, the former Marty Lund. Arn Anderson comes in. He was coming in from Mid-South where he was kind of an undercard guy, but they bring him in here and they put him right in the main event mix, and they rechristen him Arn Anderson, and they claim that he's, at times they mixed it up. It was like, is he Ole Anderson's brother? Is he his cousin, his nephew? What the fuck is he? But Arn Anderson and Ole really did look like a team. Arn was probably 15 or 20 years younger than Ole, but they had the same kind of facial, beard and mustache, and they looked like they could be relatives. And they wrestled in a very similar way, same type of body, and they looked great as a team. So what they did basically was, in order to get Ole away from Thunderbolt, and you can find this stuff on YouTube, they did a thing where Arn Anderson comes in. He's thrown into this kind of top feud with the Raging Bull Manny Fernandez, who was kind of on loan from the Mid-Atlantic territory, which was Jim Crockett. Like I said, Jim Crockett Jr. was he was taking over the NWA. It's a long story, but basically they have Raging Bull in there on loan from Mid-Atlantic. He's feuding with Arn Anderson, who's a heel, and then somehow or another Ole Anderson feels the need to step up and protect Arn Anderson because it's his family, but Ole's supposed to be a babyface with Thunderbolt as the tag champs. And long story short, there's some match where like Arn and Fernandez are fighting. Ole kind of jumps in to lend a hand to Arn. Thunderbolt Patterson takes exception to that because this was the time when it was, you know, good guys on the left, bad guys on the right. Thunderbolt gets in there to defend Raging Bull, and then Ole basically turns on Thunderbolt. So then you had your tag team champions, and Paul Heyman would take this idea and use it over and over again, mostly in ECW, but also WCW and WWF. For, you know, they still kind of use this thing, the feuding tag team partners or the feuding tag team champions. So, but this was really an early prototype of that. So you had Thunderbolt and Ole were the tag champs, but they didn't like each other. And there's this really good promo you can find where Ole Anderson like lays the whole thing out to Thunderbolt Patterson on that old TBS set, and it's really a great interview. And if you like stuff like, you know, crotchety old Bret Hart, you know, hating the world, like Bret Hart buries the universe, and if you like these old wrestlers that get all pissed off, this Ole Anderson promo is great. And this was a couple of years before the Four Horsemen. So in any event, Ole and Arn fought Raging Bull and Thunderbolt, and the winner take all for the tag team titles. So you have one tag team champion on each side. They each have a new partner. Thunderbolt's got his babyface partner, Manny Fernandez, and Ole's got his heel partner, Arn Anderson, and lo and behold, the Andersons win. So they win the national tag team title, which I think maybe, you know, another generation earlier had been meshed or merged with something called the Georgia tag team title. So the national tag team champions, you know, for me, in my, you know, generation type of thing, the Road Warriors really put this title on the map. I mean, the Road Warriors were the national tag team champions, and they're on TBS, and they're fighting, you know, Brett and Buzz Sawyer, and they're fighting King Kong Bundy and the Masked Superstar and Ronnie Garvin and all these guys, and they really put this national tag team title on a whole new level. So now Ole and Arn have these titles a couple of years later, and, you know, they kind of put those guys in the whole mix. This is 84 going into 85, and they had, I believe they had those belts, you know, right when the Four Horsemen were starting, because at Starrcade 85, they defended those national tag team titles against Billy Jack Haynes and Wahoo McDaniel, which were at the time, I think they were called the U.S. Tag Team Champions, but it wasn't the same U.S. Tag Team title you're probably thinking of with, you know, Flying Brian and the Z-Man and the Midnight Express and the Fantastics from a few years later. This was the Florida-based U.S. Tag Team title, which was really, for me, affiliated with guys like Ron Bass and Black Bart versus Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo back in the 83-84 era. So moving forth, so when you talk, say you watch Starrcade 85, the World Tag Team title match on that, I believe it's the Rock and Roll Express defeating the Russians, Ivan and Nikita Koloff, right? But you have this other tag team title match, which is Ole and Arn Anderson defending the national tag team titles successfully against the U.S. Tag Team Champions, Billy Jack Haynes and Wahoo McDaniel. And people, and I think you can even blame, you know, the wrestlers like Ric Flair, and I don't know about Arn. He may not have made this mistake, but a lot of pundits have. A lot of times when people list like the original Four Horsemen, oh, we had, you know, Ole and Arn were the World Tag Team Champions. Tully was the World TV Champion or the U.S. Champion, and Rick was the World Champion. They kind of flippantly throw this shit out there, but in fact, Ole and Arn Anderson never had the World Tag Team title. they had their chances, and most significantly, they had their chance a year later at Starrcade 86 when they fought the Rock and Roll Express, once again in a cage match. And once again, the Rock and Roll Express win their Starrcade cage match. The year before, they beat the Russians to win the titles, and then I think they lost them in the interim. In the meantime, I believe, to the Midnight Express, the Condrey Lane version. And by the time Starrcade 86 came around, they defended them against our buddies, Ole and Arn Anderson. And at that time, the U.S. Tag Team title from Florida was now kind of wiped out. And Crockett, I think, by then was about to buy Florida or already had. But you had this U.S. Tag Team Championship that was now in JCP, Jim Crockett Promotions. I could be wrong. They could have still had that Florida U.S. Tag Team title drifted around for a while before Crockett took it over eventually by 87 or by mid-87. So now we've got Ole and Arn are not the U.S. Tag Team Champions. That, I believe, at Starrcade 86, that would have been... it would have been the Russians, Ivan Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev. And I think did they defend those titles against the Kansas City Jayhawks at that show, which was Bobby Jaggers and Dutch Mantell, something to that effect. But basically, at Starrcade 86, Ole and Arn did not have the U.S. Tag Team title, they did not have the World Tag Team title, they did not have the National Tag Team title. And before you knew it, you know, by the time we get to Crockett Cup 87, Ole was out of the Horsemen, and he and Arn never won the World Tag Team title. They never fucking did, folks. So that's just something that Ric Flair gets wrong. A lot of these guys get wrong. You know, if you listen to them, and they're just listing off all the champions that the Four Horsemen had, very often people will say, Ole and Arn Anderson were the World Tag Team Champions. No, they fucking were not, okay? So that always pisses me off. Why? Because I like accuracy. And if we can't get pro wrestling history right, what chance do we have to get anything right? Okay, so in case you're wondering, why is this important? Or whatever the fuck. Then we move, now you might be saying, well, gee whiz, Mike, didn't Ole and Arn get the titles back in 1990? Nope, they challenged for them. You know, Ole kind of retired for a while. He made some guest spots at like the guest referee for Halloween Havoc 89 for the Thunderdome cage, Funk and Muda versus Flair and Sting. Arn went over. Arn started teaming up with Tully. They won the NWA World Tag Team titles twice. Arn and Tully go to WWF for a year. They win the World Tag Team title over there once. They come back. Tully fails the infamous drug test with McMahon. Crockett holds out against him, or not, it wasn't even Crockett, it was Jim Hurt at this point. And so what do? They put Arn back in tag team competition, but now he's with Ole again. And if you remember the whole swerve with Sting and the Horsemen, Ole and Arn are positioned as heels, and they face the Steiners at an actually pretty good match. I believe it was, now we're talking Wrestle War 1990 in February. I want to say February 25th, 1990. I'm just going by the top of my head. But they fought the Steiners, Rick and Stott Steiner, on the undercard of that Lex Luger substituting for Sting facing Flair match. And that's actually a really good match. I mean, I remember it feeling like it's like 45 minutes. It was probably more like 20, 25 minutes. Ole and Arn versus Steiners. I'll have to watch that at some point. So much stuff I gotta watch. But that was a really good match. But the Andersons lost. And then, as things would have it, they kind of brought back Barry Windham. They brought in Big Sid Vicious to be a Horseman. And Ole kind of got repositioned as like the manager. He kind of took over the J.J. Dillon spot for the Horseman. Here's some guy walking to his vehicle. So they never had the belts either, the Andersons. Ole and Arn. Now, if you're talking about Ole and Lars or Gene and Ole, that's a whole other story, but I'm talking specifically about Arn and Ole were never together World Tag Team Champions. Ole had those belts with other guys, and Arn, as we know, had World Tag Team Gold with a lot of other guys. Great tag team wrestler. Probably one of the best, I think maybe the best Arn Anderson tag team wrestler. Okay, so that's one. 15 minutes on the first one. I'll be quicker with the second two. WWF now, when Jesse Ventura was doing commentary, I think he started in '84 with commentary, and Adrian Adonis was kind of running up the card. Adrian went kind of from an opening act guy. He had just come off a tag team title run with Dick Murdoch. It wasn't. They didn't do a lot with Murdoch and Adonis as tag team champions. They were on TV a lot. I guess they did some stuff on TNT with Chief Jay Strongbow, but Adonis got repackaged. I want to say in late '85, early '86, as adorable Adrian Adonis. I guess it was early '86 because he was there at WrestleMania 2 in that against Uncle Elmer, and it was a new thing. But basically doing. Before there was Goldust, there was adorable Adrian Adonis, and it was just a different time. Homosexual people were really not treated properly, as they just weren't. So the Adonis character was not some type of empowerment character. It was not some type of. It was really just to ridicule, Adonis as being gay, and. He was having crushes on Paul Orndorff. I mean, some of the stuff is pretty funny because Adonis made it funny. But if you look at it with 2023 perspective, it's pretty bad. It's basically endorsing, gay bashing, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it would be interesting if they had adorable Adrian Adonis be a good guy, for instance. But we're talking about the era where AIDS was a thing. It still is, but it was even bigger back then. Eddie Murphy, if you watch, I think it's Raw, the concert video. He's talking about AIDS and stuff. So it was not a good time. Politically correctness, was not really in there yet. It was more like political incorrectness, and Adonis was personifying this adorable Adrian. Now, why do I go through all that? It's because to kind of chide Ventura on commentary, I think guys like Gorilla Monsoon especially would kind of say like, oh, you were tag team partners with Adonis. What do you know about him, Jesse? They would kind of like make these insults because Ventura was such a sharp guy on the microphone doing commentary with Gorilla or Vince McMahon or Lord Alfred Hayes. Every once in a while, one of the babyface announcers would kind of jab Ventura, pointing out that you were former tag team champions with Adrian Adonis. So they would always kind of make this reference. And I don't know if Ventura ever did. Like, I don't know if Ventura ever said, I was WWF tag team champions with Adrian Adonis. But I remember clearly that a couple of times they would say that Adonis and Ventura were WWF tag team champions at one point. Well, they actually weren't, okay? I think they might have challenged, Gurria and Martella for that in '81 a couple of times, but they did have a World Tag Team title, but it was the AWA World Tag Team title that Adonis and Ventura had. And what do they call it? I think they call them the East-West Connection. And, basically Ventura being from California, the West, Adonis being the East. It was just a deal where Adonis and Ventura did have World Tag Team Championship in their rearview mirror, in their history together, but it was not the WWF World Tag Team title, not at all. As far as I know, they might have challenged, like I said, Gurria and Martella a few times. They never won it, and but yet somehow, in order just to chide Ventura about his former teaming with Adonis, or maybe to give some credence to Ventura or to Adonis. But they always, they would say that they were former World Tag Team Champions together, but they would always say it was WWF, but it wasn't. It wasn't at all. It was AWA that they held. So, like I said, a lot of this stuff it's not life or death stuff. It's just stuff that annoys me because as an old-time wrestling fan, I just know all this shit, and it pisses me off that, for instance, like I said earlier, Ric Flair always gets that wrong. Always thinking that Ole and Arn were World Tag Team Champions. And they were not. Now, the final one is really the most obscure and the least pertinent lie or piece of misinformation. Jack and Jerry Briscoe were a great tag team I have issues a bit with how they handled, the sale of Georgia Championship Wrestling to Junior. But that aside, they're great wrestlers, and they, especially Jack, but also Jerry, were what they called shooters, like guys that could really hurt you if they fought you for real. So I do respect those guys, and I really think that I'd like to watch more of Jack Briscoe's NWA World Tag Team title. I'm sorry, NWA Singles title reign. I'd like to see more matches of those. I've seen a few videos, but I'd like to see more. He could really sell. Meaning he could really make the guy beating him up look like $1 million. So I give credit to Briscoes for wrestlers, and who knows what was going on behind the scenes. Maybe they felt they couldn't beat Vince, so they just had to join him. But in any event, the Briscoes come over to the WWF in '84. They were kind of featured on that infamous John Stossel, David Schultz thing with, what's his name? The turncoat. I guess I won't even name him because I can't remember. Eddie Mansfield, okay. So they come over, the Briscoes, and I don't know if they were promised a World Tag Team title reign or whatever as part of the deal, but they were feuding with Murdoch and Adonis, those guys. But they never won the belts from them, and they never did. The Briscoes never won the belts, and then Jack kind of just up and retired, and then they kind of put Jerry behind the scenes where, he remained for many, many years with WWF. But this lie kind of somehow developed. The Briscoes, I think, were 2 or 3 time NWA World Tag Team Champions, had a great, great match where they lost the belts for the final time at Starrcade '83. But that whole feud with the Briscoes, it was kind of a 3-team feud. It started with Sergeant Slaughter and Don Kernoodle, the late, great Don Kernoodle, who I've done a tribute video to on this channel. They were feuding with Steamboat and Youngblood. They had that whole match in Greensboro that people still talk about. Oh, the fucking traffic was backed up for 20 miles on I-95, blah, 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 So they had that whole guy, or 85, or whatever the fuck it was. But they had that whole thing. But what they did, which is kind of curious, they had those 2 teams feuding, but then they also had the Briscoes that were babyface. And the Briscoes were kind of like, hey, we'd like to face the winner of this feud, or these matches between Slaughter and Kernoodle against Steamboat and Youngblood. And what they kind of did was they kind of brought up the Briscoes up as they were kind of fading out Slaughter and Kernoodle, and they did it very well. I've watched some of the YouTube stuff on this and really played it off, I think, masterfully. Old school wrestling, you have 1 hour a week for your stuff, and they had to play these things out over a number of weeks. And the subtlety of the Briscoes turning on Steamboat and Youngblood and becoming the #1 heel team once that Slaughter and Kernoodle were done, I thought it was very well done. So any old-time Mid-Atlantic fans, my buddy John Hitchcock from Parts Unknown comic book store in Greensboro, he could probably tell you more about this. I did an interview with him on this channel. But yes, Briscoes, they had the NWA World Tag Team title. I don't know if they had any regional tag team title. They probably did. But then they go over to the WWF in '84. They never beat Murdoch and Adonis. Wyndham and Rotundo come in. They beat Murdoch and Adonis. Wyndham and Rotundo go on to WrestleMania to lose to Sheik and Volkov. And, by then the Briscoes were done. But yet in the folklore of WWF, especially when they're talking about Jerry Briscoe, they always, I can remember in the Attitude Era, they'd say that a lot. Oh, Gerald Briscoe, former World Tag Team Champion, former WWF World Tag Team Champion with his brother Jack. No, they never had the WWF World Tag Team title. They had the NWA World Tag Team title. So you see, with these 3 stories, okay, those are my official notes. These are all cases where there was a tag team, they had a championship, but in order to kind of promote the team that they were in the company that they were working with currently at the time, they would kind of reappropriate their tag team championship lineage to the new company or the new name. So, or in the Andersons' case, Ole and Arn Anderson, to blow them up, to make them seem more important and the Four Horsemen more legitimate. So these are just things that, look, this is not curing cancer. This is not curing the aforementioned AIDS. I just get upset about these things, you know, and when people misspell words on the internet like there and THEI and apostrophe RE, when people get things wrong, it offends me, okay? And like I said, if you can't get your fucking pro wrestling history right, what hope is there for humanity in general? So that's why I do the trouble of coming to you people with these videos to inform you, to correct the revisionist history that goes on in the world. I'm sure there's a lot more cases. I mean, you can look at things, I mean, on a much deeper level. There's many YouTube videos about there was all these presidents before George Washington. Oh my God, what are you talking about? Well, if you look into it, it wasn't that the United States was fully independent from Britain yet, but there was always a top person in charge. And the interesting thing is, there's some evidence that some of these gentlemen, they were all men, that were the presidents before George Washington were actually of darker skin tone, black, okay? So it's pretty interesting. And then you talk about Obama, and they say, well, he's the first African-American president, but wasn't his father from Kenya? Is Kenya part of Africa? I don't know. I mean, I'm not the fucking king of geography, but there's all these things you can go down these rabbit holes with. I find it interesting. I find facts, and basically facts are supposed to be facts, but they get manipulated and they get warped to push an agenda or to promote something. It's up for people like myself and you, intelligent people, to do the research, take the time, and make videos like this to clarify things. Now, I'm not, obviously, you know, if Jack and Jerry Briscoe had the WWF Tag Team title in 1984, is not as significant to some of these bigger picture items. But if you're talking about something like George Bush, what does he do? He invades, invades Iraq and Afghanistan because he says that they're, harboring Osama bin Laden. Well, was that the case? If not, why did all these American men die in battle? Okay, so yes, I've just taken us from a fucking here to here in the importance level of things, but I find it important to discuss things like this. And like I said, if we can't get our pro wrestling history straight, what hope do we have for the rest of the fucking everything? That's, so there you go, folks. So I hope you've enjoyed this history fucking lesson. This is One Pro Wrestling and Sports Fan on YouTube. I also have my own One Mike Messier is my film review channel. And, well, it's not just film reviews, it's life lessons, it's all types of fun things on One Mike Messier. And then the third part of this 3-channel routine is One Man and a Camera Films, which is my original short films, Messier Mantra TV show, and so forth. What you're on right now is One Pro Wrestling and Sports Fan. It's kind of the archives of everything I used to do and subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. And I'm moving forth. This is going to be where all you get your pro wrestling rants, your MMA discussions. I'm watching a lot more MMA these days. And I have this really incredible football video I'm going to bring to you, just this thought about football. Okay, folks, hopefully you got through this whole thing. For the old school pro wrestling fan, and even for the younger fan, I hope I've intellectualized you. I hope I've generated some ferocity for history for you today. I hope I've helped you in some way. You can buy my books. They're on Amazon. You can, go to the Foreign Object eBay store. You can do whatever you want. It's freedom, okay? All right, I'll talk to you guys later.